Welcome to another light reading podcast. This is the Notebook Edition. Congratulations, you've made it all the way to the month of December. Holy cow. Just exceeding our expectations. Way to go. Anyway, this is our podcast where we talk about stories from the past week. Actually, in this case, it'll be the past 2 weeks because we took the Thanksgiving holiday off. I can't believe that's already passed. But let's go around the horn and tell you who's on the podcast. I'm Phil Harvey. I'm an editor at Light Reading. Let's go by alphabetically.
Okay.
Last name or first name?
Last name.
Okay.
I guess that'd be me. Hey, Jeff Baumgartner, senior editor at Light Reading. I had to look at the letters.
Yeah, this is too much. This is too much math in the morning. I think I'm next. Mike Dano, editor at Light Reading.
Nicole Ferraro. Yeah, Ferraro, also an editor.
And
good.
Kelsey Zeiser, I'm always last. And
Yeah,
also an editor.
it's last. It's Zeiser.
Yes.
With a Z.
But this time we're going to go first with Kelsey.
Okay.
Kelsey, what fell out of your notebook this week?
Excuse me. Well,
Or the last 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Because last week's eligible as well.
okay. I finished posting the last podcast that I did from the SES and Boeing tour that I went to in El Segundo, California, which is right around the corner from the Los Angeles airport. And spoke with Ryan Reed. He's the president with Boeing Satellite Division. And he talked a little bit about their partnership with SES and launching their O3B mPOWER satellites. And those are MEO satellites, so medium Earth orbit. And those are going to be launched in mid-December, the week of the 12th. So mark your calendars.
And are those for broadband purposes, or what's the end use for those?
To deliver fiber-like connectivity.
Fiber-like.
Yeah.
from a medium Earth orbit satellite.
Yeah, so they have 5,000 beams to cover more surface area, and I think there's going to be maybe about half a dozen total. So they're going to launch a couple more. I believe it's 2 in December, and then a few more in Q1 of next year. And so SES is the satellite operator, and some of their customers are like cruise ships. So they describe it as almost like a floating town, and being able to, follow the cruise ship and deliver, make sure they have consistent connectivity. And we also spoke a little bit about underserved areas. So that's an opportunity too for places like Africa that maybe doesn't have the same fiber infrastructure as other areas, so they can access that satellite network.
Yeah. So with new satellite tech, they're going to be a bit more of a competitor, be in a better competitive position to take on like Starlink and companies like that are doing low Earth orbit.
Yeah, and that was kind of interesting to talk to them about. Why launch MEO versus the LEO, the lower Earth orbit satellites, and it's been a while since I took physics in high school, but it seems like with higher up you can cover more surface area of the Earth, so utilize less satellites to cover more area. And that was your science moment for today.
Thank you. Yeah, very good.
There will be a test.
Well, you started talking about satellites, so suddenly Mike woke up. So I was.
Is there going to be a test about this afterward? Because I might need a refresher after all this.
Yes, you're going to have to calculate the trajectory of the satellite.
Signal degradation from medium to low Earth orbit, and how that translates to service interruption.
All right. I'll be back in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'll have
I remember gravity, isn't it like negative 9.8 meters per second or something? That's all I remember.
Sure.
If you say so.
What you said.
I'm just making
Only we had devices connected to the internet at all times to help us look things up.
Mike's furiously Googling.
I don't even know what to Google. I got nothing.
Well, let's bail Mike out. Mike, what did you cover the last couple of weeks, or what stories stood out to you, even if you didn't cover them, that were of interest?
Well, speaking of math, I actually did.
10
This
points
is-
for that
Episode is
transition.
getting worse and worse.
I
I
love
was
it.
hoping he would say football, but never mind. Go ahead, math.
No,
Sure.
actually,
Yeah.
I mean, there is a small amount of math that I did have to do. So I did a story on 6G, and okay, so follow me on this one, because here's the stories. So the upshot here is that Dish Wireless is going to rule 6G. And here's the argument for this, right? Is that okay? So there's a thing called 6G. It comes after 5G, and they're supposed to do it in the year 2030 or whatever. And the new thing is that people are starting to talk about what spectrum band is 6G going to work in. And when they first started talking about 6G a couple of years ago, they were like, oh, it's going to work in the terahertz bands. It's going to work in the millimeter wave bands. It's going to work in these like super high bands.
Mm-hmm.
But the recent discussion around 6G is actually much lower. It's actually in the spectrum bands that are like 7 gigahertz to like 20 gigahertz, which is lower than terahertz, lower than millimeter wave, right? And so the reason that Dish is involved is, well, Dish actually owns a large chunk of spectrum right at 12 gigahertz, like right in the middle of what they're saying is the good bands for 6G. And Dish has a proceeding at the FCC that's like, hey, you should let us put wireless communications in this band. They're not allowed to yet. That band is like reserved for satellite stuff right now.
Mm-hmm.
But Dish Network is asking the FCC to change the rules for that band. And then if they do, then Dish would have this huge amount of spectrum, and hey, they're talking about 6G for this band. And so if A equals B and B equals C, then Dish Network is gonna crush it in 6G. That's see that? Yeah, that's
Well,
math.
yeah,
Yeah.
even
I
rhymes
get that is math.
too.
Yeah,
There's a little rhyme in there.
letters,
I like it.
numbers. You got the whole thing. Well, Mike,
Yeah. Got all this.
I have a question about 6G, right? Because there were all the use cases that were talked about 5G, right? And they haven't necessarily paid off all that well for some of these guys.
What?
I know,
I'm
it's
shocked.
crazy. So what is it about 6G that what's kind of the use case or the reason for another set of standards,
Right. Because remote
Invisibility.
surgery and
Yeah.
autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
Which are the exact same use
I was like,
cases
it
they talk
sounds
about
familiar.
in 5G.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
there's nothing about 6G that's different. It's all the same.
Other
It's
than
all the same
the
stuff.
spectrum bands potentially.
Spectrum bands might be different. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just more of everything we do now, and then they keep hoping that someone will invent an application that's been as valuable as like Uber and Lyft and that sort of thing. That could only have existed on that thing, but they retroactively fit the use case to justify the investment. But fast forward to you have to be 10 years out into the investment before you realize there's a use case. So it depends on what side you want to argue, I guess.
Yeah.
Build it and they will come. I mean, the interesting thing is that fixed wireless has really become the use case for 5G, and so that's sort of an interesting thing that really there was some suspicion that was going to happen, but it's been sort of a surprise, I think, to everybody, the amount of momentum around fixed wireless in 5G. So maybe 6G will have something else that comes along. No one really knows. My
Certainly
bet
could.
on augmented reality glasses. That's my bet.
Do you feel like the fixed wireless use case was sort of made by the pandemic, though? Like, doesn't 6G kind of need a pandemic moment in order to accelerate
Oh,
its
don't jinx
potential
it,
use
Nicole.
case?
Yeah,
I mean, the future's doomed regardless, so let's just talk about it.
Oh yeah, let's get that T-shirt going. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you heard it here first, everybody.
You should stop inviting me to these.
Nicole has that crocheted on a pillow in her heavily fortified office.
on the other
The future doesn't exist.
on the reverse of the pillow, it just says "Don't bother."
Yeah, all right. Comfort schmumfort.
It's
Anyway,
really
what
hard
was the
pillow. It's
question?
not very comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I'm looking forward to my next pandemic. Find out what that is.
But it is interesting that the fixed wireless use case really did come into its own through the pandemic. I'm not sure that 5G would have, brought so much fixed wireless to us without the need for so much fixed broadband over the last.
That's true. Like it was they were, the timing of those two things was pretty noteworthy.
This kind of highlights the conspiracy theory that 5G is in the vaccine. It all ties together. Yes. It all ties together.
You need one of those boards behind you with all the strings connecting different.
Exactly. Yeah. There's Charlie Day.
From, this is exactly why people come to podcasts.
I want to be clear. I have every single vaccine that they offer. So
no one else would want to hear.
Nicole's just got Band-Aids up and down her arms.
Yeah, no. Give me any vaccine. If they're in test, if your preschooler's making it, I don't care. Give it to me. I want it. Just
stick me.
That's another weird offer/dare from Nicole. I have a 6G follow-up there. Not a question, but actually something else you should read on our site. Ian's piece this week talked about it was last week, how 6G could be disruptive to traditional telecom vendors. He cited Ericsson because he had been in an Ericsson event and heard some of their folks speaking. But the reasoning behind it wasn't far out. More cloud-based functions. That's not what they grew up doing. Less of a need for specialized silicon, so there's not as much of a hardware advantage. Bigger embrace of Open RAN-like tactics, so meaning whatever comes next, we're probably going to end up with more software competition in the network to some degree. 6G being truly different from 5G in terms of it's not based on 4G tech. We don't think it'll likely be, a little bit, maybe a little bit different. And then there's the economies of scale advantage, which kind of goes away for the big networking equipment providers because, or at least on the telecom side, because mobile standards were once global. They seem to be being dragged into kind of the more geopolitical turf war. So they might get more and more fractured, which means if you own, a particular technology in a particular space, it's going to be a much smaller addressable market. So that could favor cloud providers, IT networking companies, and those that sort of build out that way. So, if you put all that together, in addition to Nicole's vaccine radio theory, no, I'm kidding. It does actually, raise a bunch of questions about 6G and how it will affect the industry, because it could actually disrupt some of the major suppliers, inadvertently almost, even though you would think they would stand to profit the most, but the way things are going, at least at this point, maybe not. Speaking of, Nicole, let's pivot to you so we can keep things rocking right along. What was in your notebook this week or last?
Sure. So you mentioned something called Thanksgiving. The holiday that I was tracking in November was not Thanksgiving. It was the release of the National Broadband Map by the FCC on November 18th, which was a week before Thanksgiving, but we haven't talked about it yet on this hit podcast show. I figured I'd talk about it a little bit because I did have an update story on it this week. So just to recap, the FCC released the National Broadband Map a couple weeks ago. So that means now everybody has access not to the underlying data, but to the map itself. You can go in, you can type in your home address, your business address, and you should do that because doing so is how we can all, in theory, improve the map. Because there is a challenge process that's baked in that now we regular people can participate in. Previously, it was just the ISPs and the local governments and municipalities that were able to submit challenge data. So I say in theory we can improve the map because when you do submit a challenge, it then goes to the ISP who submitted the underlying data to review your challenge, potentially connect with you to try to resolve it. If there's no resolution, the FCC will ultimately decide how a challenge get resolved. So it definitely remains to be seen how much challenges change the map as it stands right now. But the FCC is requesting that everybody gets challenges in. That includes regular people like you and me, and governments and ISPs that can continue to challenge the data by January 13th, because then the map is going to be revised so that NTIA can make its BEAD allocations by summer 2023. Are you with me so far?
Have you gone in?
Yes.
Have you gone in yourself and plugged in, and did it match? Did it look right?
I'm glad you asked, because the first thing I did was plug in my own home address, and I got to submit a challenge, a location challenge, because my apartment building was not listed as a broadband serviceable location. I assume it's because they're mad at me because I said some things about the process in my articles.
No more broadband for you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Your building does not exist.
But exactly. Yeah, it was funny. They had my whole block, but not my
Nicole
building.
was like, I know. We don't exist.
Actually, I've known I've never existed. I am a ghost, as I have always suspected. But to that point, you can submit two types of challenges for fixed broadband: a location challenge and an availability challenge. A location challenge, you file a location challenge like I did if the map is missing a broadband serviceable location. You file an availability challenge if you look up your address and the provider's service claims are wrong according to what you know. And if you want to challenge mobile data, which is also on the map, you can do that through the FCC's speed test app. Regarding speeds, for fixed broadband, the map is showing highest available advertised speeds, and you cannot challenge speed data for fixed broadband. Period. End of story. Bringing it back around to the story I had this week, there was a broadband group called the Schools, Health, and Libraries Coalition, Broadband Coalition, that met with the FCC recently and filed a letter ex parte to raise an issue with the map that the map does not show community anchor institutions as broadband serviceable locations. That's not a mistake. That is baked into the FCC's cost modeling for broadband data. The FCC only collects data on mass market broadband. So it does not collect data on locations that would potentially subscribe to non-mass market broadband. They consider those large enterprises as part of the cost model, but the large enterprises also include small businesses and community anchor institutions. So there's potentially, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of locations that are not on the map as broadband serviceable. This was raised as an issue by Jonathan Chambers, who works with Connexon prior to the map's release, because as an ISP, he was working with the data already, so he could see this. And he pointed out that there's tons of small rural businesses that aren't listed on the map as broadband serviceable, and that could really impact their BEAD allocations. And so this week, the SHLB coalition filed an ex parte basically pointing to this issue as far as it goes for community anchor institutions, and not asking the FCC to revise its cost model, which I think is a far more complicated issue to address, but asking the FCC to mark all community anchor institutions as broadband serviceable by default on the next version of the map. I asked the FCC if they're going to do that or if that's even feasible with this cost model in place. They obviously didn't answer me. But I have noticed that you can now you can file a location challenge now and mark a location as a community anchor institution. Now, is that a feasible way to deal with, hundreds of thousands of community anchor institutions across the country versus having the data already that shows that they're broadband serviceable and then going in and saying, no, this takes an enterprise level service? That's not for me to decide, but that is the big challenge as far as that aspect of the challenge process goes. So,
wow. Yeah, they've got a lot to sort of to address there. But it's interesting because, it's $42 billion at stake, right? So I guess it's we have to go through some amount of trouble to allocate that correctly. It's interesting that they wouldn't include the anchor institutions, because can't those a lot of those are fiber fed and could potentially be ripe for public-private partnership type broadband deployments. If you're already taking fiber to a library that basically keeps, like the regional libraries here in Texas, they keep bankers hours basically. So And they're all located right smack in the middle of communities.
Anyway. And the coalition I mentioned did point out to the FCC that the broadband legislation mentions that it wants to prioritize getting gigabit service to anchor institutions. So in theory, you would need to know what anchor institutions are already getting in order to make sure that they're getting that service. So it's going to be a complicated issue going forward.
I like that you submitted a challenge, though. I would actually say, everybody, please do look at your own service and how it's described and listed in the broadband map. It would be it really does help to see how the government sees what your competitive scenario is, because the provider that you're using might be making claims that, especially if you're having trouble with your connectivity and it's not as great as it says. Wait till you see what they put on what they tell the FCC. It might be completely different. So it's definitely worth checking.
Yep. Exactly.
Sorry, I thought it was interesting about checking speeds because if you remember, like circa 2020 and 2019, Verizon was talking about how 5G was going to be so fast, and then Apple came out with its first 5G iPhone. It was like, oh, it's a gigabit service. It's super fast. It's 5G. It's amazing. And on the new FCC maps, the speeds for 5G that they offer, the only two speed tiers that are included on those maps is 7 megabits a second or like 35 megabits a second. That's all. That's as fast as the FCC maps go for 5G. So yeah, definitely over promising and under delivering is the name of the game here.
Yep. Jeff, let's wrap up with you so we can keep it moving along. I don't want to. We're on a bit of a time crunch today.
All right. Yeah. I think this week it was kind of a weird one. It was like kind of a Back to the Future moment for the cable industry. Kind of story kind of emerged that there's like 20 million set-top boxes out there that use this conditional access system that Scientific Atlanta developed like 30 years ago, where the internal clock in it is going to roll over next in 2024, like around November. So what's the problem? The problem is all those boxes, if they don't do something about it, will just not decrypt video anymore. So not something that really they advertised much. Back when Scientific Atlanta was doing this in the early days of digital cable. So anyway, another company has it now, most of it, Vantiva, they're called, and the old Technicolor spin out. So they put out a warning in July that, hey, operators that have these boxes, you need to remedy this by the mid 2024 to November 2024 deadline or timeline, or all these boxes are just going to be inoperable. So they've come up with they're working on a remedy for the power key boxes that have the old cable card modules in it. They're not going to worry about the embedded security devices, but another company, Adara, is proposing an idea where you can fix all of those boxes with kind of a technique where they'll spoof the clock internally on the set-top box. So anyway, there's all these approaches, and I talked to Comcast, and they're like, well, we're just going to swap them out. We're just going to swap the devices out. Anyway, some other operators might do it, but that's expensive. It could be disruptive. So it'll be something to kind of watch. Keep an eye on for the next couple of years. And it kind of made me wonder if the other side of the duopoly, the Motorola General Instrument side, they developed their conditional access system around the same time. I'm just wondering if they have a similar rollover problem. So I've been poking around on that. I haven't found anything, but I'm curious to find out. So that was.
But the headline here is that tens of millions of people have pay TV service that might just stop in the middle, stop and go completely blank in the next 2 years if they don't get some technology change fixed. And it's not a change that they themselves can handle unless they cut the cord. They can talk to their
Yeah.
cable operator, and they have to kind of
they proactively do
upgrade you
something.
or do something.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think if nothing changes, that's exactly what'll happen. Like the boxes won't work, but the operators are or should be by now aware of this problem. So there is a couple of years to kind of deal with it. It's just how are they going to deal with it? Are they just going to swap out boxes, or are they going to do these other techniques to try to salvage these devices, give them some legs? But it's just like another milestone along the path to the death of the old traditional set-top box. And it's almost like this clock thing almost does some of these operators a favor in a way, if you're thinking about eventually migrating off of this stuff. It's like, well, this clock thing, we got to do it, versus just letting things kind of naturally, take their natural course here.
Yeah, by natural you mean get less and less useful to the people that they're serving while charging them the same amount of money. That's usually the
that's what you're saying, Phil. Yeah.
MO. Yeah. Those are the opinions of one Phil Harvey who admittedly doesn't read a lot. So let's just get that on the record.
You should check out our website.
Yeah, I should. Yeah. Wait, hold on. Lightreading.com. Is that where I can read about clock spoofing?
Exactly. That's your source for all clock spoofing.
All right.
We don't miss a thing on clock spoofing, I can tell you.
I'm not searching clock spoofing on Google by no means at all. I just I'm already I have enough problems. I don't need that out there. Okay. Let's see. I think it's a pretty eclectic bunch of news stories that have pulled together the week. Does anybody have anything randomly interesting we could wrap up with? We're already past time, but anything off topic or silly that you want to lead with?
So there is a movie that's coming out next year called Cocaine Bear.
Oh, I saw the trailer yesterday.
And there is a trailer for this movie where a bear eats cocaine and then kills people. And it is the greatest thing that's ever happened. And here's the part that I wanted to mention. I just found out apparently it's based on a true story where an actual bear ate a bunch of cocaine.
Yeah, like 30 kilos or something.
Or Alabama.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it said it dropped out of an airplane from a drug dealer, but the poor bear OD'd. So I think the movie is,
Wait, the bear's dead?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were saying
eating
the bear was going to join us next week.
He's still out there.
I know. She's already got the guest booking forms and the consent decree and all that stuff. All like she was getting ready to fax it off to whoever his agent was. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we should have him on the next podcast as interview with Cocaine Bear.
It'd be a really
I thought that was going to be what the way he said it. I thought he was going to say there's a movie called Cocaine Bear. And the bear is my friend.
It always comes back to illicit drugs on this podcast.
Well, now do you think this movie will generate public interest more in bears or more in cocaine? I guess is the.
I think coked up bears specifically.
Maybe this is a question that business journalists shouldn't even be dealing with at all.
I mean, I'm hoping it's a cautionary tale of if you find cocaine in the woods, is
that what you're? Okay, that's what you're getting from.
I think it's
I think my entire career has been a cautionary tale.
Not what I gleaned from this at all.
Well,
yeah. All right. I think this is a great place to leave it. I just want to leave it right here with Cocaine Bear on the brain. Don't Google clock spoofing. Remember to watch Cocaine Bear. Satellites are your friends. It doesn't matter how high up they are. Check your broadband map, and 6G is probably going to kill us all. Oh, no, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for listening, and have a fantastic weekend.